Here it is, everyone, Nvidia's brand new RTX 5080 Founders Edition GPU. Unlike the 5090, this bad boy didn't see some wild price jump. In fact, it stayed the same as last gen, and luckily Nvidia sent one over for me to test out, though obviously that won't affect my review. Either way, I thought I'd do a head-to-head against its nearest competitor, the RX 7900 XTX. Does Nvidia's new GPU come out on top? Or is AMD's current gen card the better buy? Oh, and if you want to pick up the 5080 when it's released, I'll have affiliate links down in the description below. Welcome everyone to Gamer Melt. The RTX 5080 Founders Edition card comes with essentially the same design as the 5090. It has a shortened PCB, so both fans blow straight onto the heat pipes and out the other end. This makes for a wildly efficient and thin design, and it definitely looks nice overall with its simple yet elegant design that can go great in an office setting or in your favorite gaming rig. When it comes to specs, the 5080 isn't exactly a massive jump over last gen. At 10,752 CUDA cores, it's only 10.5% more than the 4080 and a measly 5% more than the 4080 Super. It does come with GDDR7 memory, but it's the same 16GB across a 256-bit bus as last gen. With that said, it does have slightly higher clocks with a base clock of 2.3 GHz and a boost of 2.62 GHz. The biggest difference, of course, is the new Blackwell architecture, which comes with their next generation ray tracing cores as well as tensor cores. Now, the tensor cores may not seem like much, but because they offer native support for FP4 compute versus the 4000 series FP8, they're able to get up to double the performance, though an inaccuracy loss because you don't have as many digits to work with. Either way, they're apparently so much better that only the RTX 5000 series can run Nvidia's DLSS 4 multi-frame generation. Of course, it could just be an artificial way to boost the new card's performance over last gen, so whether that's actually required is tough to say. But regardless, Nvidia has made DLSS 4 exclusive to their new 5000 cards. So the question is all of that good enough to make AMD's 7900 XTX obsolete? Or will the RDNA 3 GPU hold its own? Let's find out. When it comes to performance, I'll just say it right off the bat. Nvidia's new 5080 wins in pretty much everything. The 4080 Super used to come out on top in ray tracing, with the 7900 XTX winning overall in rasterization. But with the 5080, it basically wins across the board, whether it's rasterization or ray tracing. With that said, it isn't as big of a jump as you might think. Simply put, the 5080 isn't as much of an uplift as many previous generations, at least when it comes to rasterization, because while it does win overall in rasterization, in many games, it's not by a lot. But when it comes to ray tracing, it's probably not a surprise that Nvidia's newest card more or less crushes the 7900 XTX. So much so that the more ray tracing a game uses, the more Nvidia's card moves ahead. Take Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K with RT Overdrive, which includes path tracing. Here, with no upscaling or frame generation, Nvidia's 5080 beats the 7900 XTX by over 110%. That's a massive performance difference. Of course, you may notice that neither games are at playable frame rates, so it may not matter all that much to many, but when you turn on their respective upscaling tech, without frame generation, that difference in performance really matters. Now, this is likely where a lot of you will say that you don't care about ray tracing, and for a while, I was at least somewhat on the fence, though I was more of a wait and see if this ends up being more of a gimmick or if it actually sticks around. And at this point, it definitely looks like ray tracing isn't going anywhere, but it's actually bigger than that. Because not only is ray tracing here to stay, in many new games, it's becoming a requirement. For example, in the new Indiana Jones game, it doesn't give you the option to turn ray tracing completely off. And we just found out that the upcoming Doom game is the same way. Now, you may just call the devs lazy or the game unoptimized. I believe they do it because it takes a lot of work to offer two completely different lighting systems. And you may call that lazy, which is understandable, but it's the way the industry is going regardless. So I definitely argue that ray tracing is a lot more important than it used to be. And to make matters worse, if you want to use things like path tracing to get the absolute best looking games, it gets even worse for AMD because this is where Nvidia's new DLSS 4 multi-frame generation really comes into play. As you can see in Cyberpunk 2077 with RT Overdrive on, everything turned to the max in DLSS 4 performance mode with 4x frame gen, the 5080 is getting an average of 186 FPS. Simply put, there's nothing AMD can do to get even close to this. Of course, with any frame generation, you're not getting any better input latency, but keep in mind that you're getting around the same latency as the base rendered frame rate, and with upscaling on, it's the frame rate at the lower resolution. So as long as it's at least a decent FPS, you should have a hard time noticing input lag. Ultimately, I enjoyed how DLSS 4 feels and looks, but I may not be that sensitive to it, so your mileage may vary. One area that AMD's 7900 XTX may be worth it for you is in its memory capacity. While the 5080 maintains the same 16GB as last gen, the 7900 XTX comes with 24. And given the fact that games seem to require more and more memory lately, this could be a compelling reason to pick one over the 5080. Though as of right now, 16GB should be fine for every game out there. If it were 12GB, it might be a major concern. But with 16, unless you love piling on texture mods or something like that, you should be fine. So what does all of this mean? Well, for one, while Nvidia's 5080 is set to launch at the same $1,000 that the 7900 XTX did, AMD's card is 2 years old at this point. So quite a few models have been discounted, with the Sapphire model as low as $830. And at that price point, the 7900 XTX looks pretty good, especially if you're not too concerned about ray tracing. But if we're talking anywhere near the same price, Nvidia's newest card is a surefire win. With all of that said, AMD still hasn't given us all the details on their 9070 XT. We know it should have a huge boost in ray tracing performance, but it's also likely called the 9070 for a reason. I don't believe it's actually made to challenge the 5080. At the end of the day, Nvidia's newest card isn't the generational jump we're used to when it comes to rasterization performance. But with multi-frame generation, it has some tricks up its sleeve that make it a decent buy, especially since AMD seems to be dropping out of the high end for this generation.